Hi, everyone. For my project, I decided to research the translation of Diary of a Wimpy Kid by Jeff Kinney. And yeah, I really enjoyed reading these books as a kid, so I thought it'd be interesting to learn more about the translation of these books. So, for those of you who are not familiar with Diary of a Wimpy Kid, or just need a little refresher, the whole book centers around Greg, the protagonist, who's on the far left, and his adventures through middle school. So all the weird, crazy, funny things that happened to him in his time there. And other notable characters, we have Roderick, his older brother, Manny, his younger brother, Mr. and Mrs. Heffley, his parents, as well as Rowley, his best friend. And for this project, I am just focusing on the first book in this series, and as well as some Spanish translations. I've also included a few French translations. I took French for a few years before my mission, so I just thought it would be cool to have another perspective with a few terms. Okay, and some challenges and issues with translating a book like this. First of all, there is a ton of localized humor. So the whole book is centered on Greg going through middle school, which is something that we've all experienced, growing up here in the US. So there's, the awkwardness, just weird transitional, just cultural things that are very American, just growing up in the public education system. There's also, potty humor, which is, something that juvenile, like, just things that we experience. And then we also have middle school insults. So things that are a little harsh, but not quite as intense as maybe what people would use as adults. So there's all that going on that's just very unique to the US. And then, in addition to that, we have jokes that are made on um, just spelling or random words. And so we have cheese touch, which is just something made up in the book. We also have Zooey Mama. It's just something completely random that's unique to this book that really has no sense in English either. Then we also have different things like loaded diaper that's spelled wrong, and also just random things like little cutie as a reference to a comic strip. So just all of these really random, really niche, specific things that are just in this book. So, for strategies to resolve these translation issues, I noticed a lot of localization, transcreation, some omission or generalization of some terms, as well as the illustrations and quote bubbles also aiding transition. It kind of gives the reader a visual view of what's happening. Okay, so first, let's talk about localization in Diary of a Wimpy Kid. So there's some school vocab that is in the US. So there's some references back to elementary school. So whether that's first grade or fifth grade. And so in Spanish, they refer back to this time period as just la primaria. And in the fifth grade, the book says el quinto de primaria. And then in French, I thought it was interesting. They have specific grade levels for these age ranges. So they put that equivalent in there, whether that's the CP or the CM2 in reference to fifth grade. Yeah, so just different things referencing education vocab. Also, we have the concept of hanging out. So in the book, there's a scene where Rowley comes up to Greg and asks him to play. And as we can see, just based on the text, kind of the emphasis there and like the weirdness of the, wording, that we can tell that that's not normal. It's meant to stick out. And we, growing up, have experienced that transition where we used to ask to go on play dates or asking to go play. But when we get older, it's more culturally appropriate or acceptable to say, hang out or something similar to that. So I was curious to see how that would be translated. And so in Spanish, they talk about the transition from a casa a jugar to salimos por ahí. And then I thought this was really interesting. O nos viciamos con la consola. So to get addicted to gaming or like to the game console or, something like that. So they kind of did their own version for that. Okay, now let's move on to transcreation. There are a ton of examples of transcreation, and I have a really fun time kind of going through and seeing what examples there were. So first, let's just start with the title. Diary of a Wimpy Kid. So in the US and, in English, wimpy is, kind of an insult, but it's not too crazy strong, but, it's, wimpy. You don't want to be called wimpy. And so to translate that in Spanish, they just Diario de Greg, and then un pringao total, which is a reference to pringado, which is a Spanish slang term like used in Spain, that basically just means like a loser or a sucker. That was kind of the equivalent that I found. And then the French version I thought was really interesting. So it's a journal de gonflé. And so dégonflé, in and of itself means wimpy. However, we notice that the de at the beginning is crossed out. And if you take that out and just read the word gonflé, that actually means like cocky or confident. And so, that's kind of the joke there that the de is crossed out so he becomes confident, but in reality, we know it's dégonflé. So I thought that was interesting as well. And then on top of that, we have some knock knock jokes or just some back and forth things that were just created uniquely for that language because translating it literally would not have the same effect or create the same thing. So we can see that from English to Spanish. And I'm just going to help with the French translation a little bit. So the word or the letter G is pronounced je, which is also similar to the French word je, which je meaning I. So if you read it, it says j'ai bien envie de chatouiller, which I really want to tickle you. So there's the play on words there. So that's how they uniquely translated that. And of course, the cheese touch, the infamous cheese touch, which is then referenced to being like the cooties. So since this is just a random thing that's unique to the book, the cheese touch, you kind of have to explain the context with it, that it's not just the literal touching of the cheese, but that it's something bad and that it's contagious. And also referencing cooties, which is just something in, American culture for kids. So in Spanish, we have la maldición del queso. Es como cuando juegas a tula or tú la llevas. So kind of referencing to tag, that it's something that can be spread or like, passed around. And then in French, it's called the marque du fromage. And then c'est un peu comme les poux, or like lice. So it's giving that kind of contagious, sickly element, like, oh, you do not want this. So I thought that was interesting as well, how they made that unique. And of course, Zooey Mama. In this comic strip, we see this very unique just a random string of words in English that has no real meaning. But in Spanish, they chose the term gajes del oficio, which is basically meaning it's just part of the job or like hazards of the trade. So it's usually said when something happens, but the speaker accepts that it's normal for them or just happens. So I thought that was interesting as well. Um, and then loaded diaper in Spanish to convey the same, you have to have the spelling error, and also loaded diaper is something like a little crude, and also Roderick's part of a, rock and roll type vibe. So they have to create the same type of punk vibe, but also spell it wrong. And they decided to go with cerebros retorcidos, but it was meant to say cerebros retorcidos. So that's how they did that. And also, there's some examples of just omission or generalizing. So some of these terms they were able to be super creative and come up with their own version. However, sometimes it just was better to generalize or just omit something in general. There's a time where they're talking about a school play, and everyone for the audition is supposed to sing My Country 'Tis of Thee, which is just super American. It's an American song that only people would know. And so in Spanish, they just kept it as una canción absolutamente ridícula. So they just kind of generalized it since there's not a same type of unifying song in Spain or in Spanish in general. And also, there's the term noogies, which I honestly have not thought about in a while, but it's used here. So it says, but no matter how many noogies I give him, he always forgets the next time. But in Spanish, culturally, there's not anything there to really translate. So they just took it out, pero no importa cuántas veces se lo explique, siempre se le olvida. So they just took it out because it keeps the meaning and it didn't really add anything. And yeah, that's kind of an overview of some of the strategies used to help with some of the difficult things that come with translating these humorous books, especially, kind of at this juvenile middle school level. Yeah, it's really hard, but I saw lots of cool strategies and just different things that contribute to the translation. So thanks for listening.